Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Lisa Karlan. Welcome to Hey Doc, What's New in Plant-Based Medicine? Today we're going to talk about digestive health, and I have two great guests. One is Dr. Vanessa Méndez. She is a board-certified gastroenterologist, and she's on the bottom of the screen. And to my right is Natalie Castro. So she's a master's prepared registered dietitian, and together these two ladies work with each other. So I always start off my show by saying, "Hey Doc, what's new in plant-based medicine?" Vanessa, let me know what's new.
Absolutely. So something that I really want to focus on is food sensitivities. A lot of our patients, a lot of the population has it, and it makes them think that some of these plant-based foods are not good for us when they really are. And getting to the root cause of what's actually causing the food sensitivities is the key to fixing their gut health and really allowing them to thrive with a plant-based diet.
Okay, and Natalie, tell us what's new in plant-based medicine with respect to dietetics.
Yeah, so the best thing about nutrition is that we all have to eat 3 times a day, right? So everyone's very into, what's new and what should we have, but there just seems to be so much confusion as to what's good, what's not good for me. So today we're going to dive into that, just to kind of clear the air on what is good to eat and what you should have in your diet on a regular basis.
That sounds like a really informative show. And then during the show, when I get comments, I'll put them up on the screen, and then one of you can address the comment. That would be great. All right, well, let's put up the first slide, and we'll talk about this. So this is our title slide. Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about what we're doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about digestive issues, food sensitivities, and nutrition myths. These are really hot topics in the plant-based world, even in the non-plant-based world. And it's just a lot of confusion and misinformation when it comes to certain foods. So, things like soy and things like wheat, lectins, grains, and even the FODMAP diet. We're going to dive deep into these.
That's great. Okay.
So some of the causes of inflammation in the gut are definitely stemming from disturbances in the intestinal microbiota. We all have, and I've gone in depth into this in previous shows with you, Lisa, but we all have good bugs and bad bugs, right? So, and it's about having that balance of more diversity of the good bugs so that they can thrive, do their job, and actually keep under control the bad ones. We're never going to get rid of the bad bugs. All of us have it, but it's just about making those good bugs thrive. And if you go to the next slide, we can dive a little bit deeper into how this works. So first of all, the colon wall is made up of epithelial cells and tight junctions that keep these cells together and sealed from the outside world. If we think about it, actually 70% of our immune system is in our gut, and our colon and our intestines are one of the first lines of defense against pathogens and toxins. So it's really important to preserve this cellular fortress to protect us from the outside world, everything around us, and that we consume on a daily basis. In the inner lining of the intestine lives our intestinal flora. And this supports the cell wall by reinforcing these tight junctions when they create these things, these magical things called short chain fatty acids, or CSFA, and by lining our intestinal lining with a layer of mucus. These two processes are essential to keep pathogens and toxins out. On the other side of our cellular wall lives our gut-associated lymphoid tissue, that lymphatic system where the immune system is working around the clock. So just separated by a microscopic layer of epithelial cells, our microbiota and our lymph system are in constant communication, just tiny little layer of epithelial cells. So they're constantly communicating with each other, whether they should be alarmed to something or whether there's beneficial products that the microbiota are making. If you go back to that slide, these two work together by preventing the entry of these harmful pathogens and translocation of harmful substances called lipopolysaccharides. And I know these are technical terms that we're starting out with, so it's going to get less technical as we go on. And this allows the entry of beneficial products called, short chain fatty acids. This allows them to regulate inflammation and immune response to invaders. So if you look at a fiber-rich diet really is the energy source for the microbiota, and it's on the left side of the slide, and it shows how it keeps that cellular fortress intact. It maintains that mucus layer and doesn't allow any pathogens or toxins to cross over to our body, and especially not to cross over to the immune system. Now, a diet that is low in fiber, if you see it on the right side of that picture, since the beneficial microbiota thrive on fiber, that is their energy source, and they are responsible for maintaining that cellular fortress. When you do not have enough fiber in your diet, let's say a standard American diet, a highly processed vegan diet, for example, then what happens is that you're not providing the energy to the microbiota. That cellular fortress starts to break down, and then pathogens and toxins start to cross over to the lymphatic side, to the immune system side, and then the immune system starts to ramp up, not only creating possibly antibodies to the foods that we're consuming, but also creating systemic inflammation, which we know is at the root cause of things like obesity, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune disorders, and there's now even been links to Parkinson's disease, dementia, and anxiety and depression. The list goes on and on. So this imbalance of our gut microbiome, we term it dysbiosis, okay? And it's really the first step in this cascade of inflammation that gives rise to all sorts of diseases, not only, digestive diseases, but all the other diseases I mentioned that are associated with inflammation in the body. So if you go to the next slide.
Can we answer the question? Betty and Corey want to know.
I'm sorry, I'm not used to it. Yeah, so does a fiber-rich diet help to rid of inflammation? Absolutely, it does. But that's why we want to address the points that we're going to address in this in this session, because yes, it does, and that is the key to lasting health, special microbial health, and it is the ultimate anti-inflammatory diet. But we have to go about it in the right way. So yes, the answer is yes. So for example,
I wanted to add in there too that I think that everything that so many patients don't realize the effect that the fiber has on the gut, and so we hear things about like leaky gut and kind of connecting to exactly what you're saying. So I think people relate with that, but knowing that it's the imbalance that's happening and how the food can connect with what they are eating. So connecting that dot that what you're putting into your body is making a huge effect.
I love that point. Thank you for clarifying that, Natalie. So Natalie's exactly right. So for example, that imbalance in our gut microbiome, we say food is healing or it can hurt us. Everything we put in our bodies on a daily basis can go either for healing or for hurting our bodies and causing inflammation. So now we actually have a mechanism of how that happens. And that mechanism is through the microbiome, because since the microbiome feeds and its energy source is fiber, if we don't feed it, then we're contributing to that disruption in the colonic wall, that leaky gut, which is the layman's term. We call it increased intestinal permeability. And that is the pathway that, when we say food as medicine, that's really what we're talking about. At a microscopic level, that is the mechanism of action that's happening.
Okay, should we go to the next slide, or did you want this one?
Yeah, so some controversial foods, as we alluded to before, are things like whole grains and gluten, legumes and soy. These are incredibly healthy foods. They're associated with disease prevention and longevity. So if we jump right into these topics with the next slide, we're going to talk about grains and health. We know from all the data out there, there have been tons of research studies, not only following, the blue zones and their diet patterns, but also many different populations throughout the world, that avoiding whole grains and whole wheat products is actually associated with negative health outcomes. In controlled studies, they've shown that subjects who replaced For example, refined grains like white bread, white pasta with whole grains saw an increase in that short chain fatty acid production that is associated with health and a decrease in inflammation. So whole grains have been shown to maintain a healthy digestive system. They've been associated with decreases in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and prevention of obesity. They're associated with decrease in the risk of mortality, and they're associated with longevity. They are regularly consumed in the blue zones populations throughout, the 6 regions of the world. And if you go on to the next slide, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into one of the most controversial topics, right? Which is gluten. Is gluten healthy? So let's break it down. Only 1 to 2% of the population has celiac disease. Okay, that's very small percentage of the population. This is a genetic disorder that is only diagnosed with a biopsy. So if you've gotten blood tests and the doctors have told you, oh, you have celiac disease, no, that's not the way to actually diagnose celiac disease. It's a way to confirm it, but we can't diagnose it that way. So definitely need a biopsy by a gastroenterologist. But what we see more in clinical practice is a report that patients are intolerant to gluten. This intolerance, we've seen that it can be associated with many, many different things. So first of all, gluten products are found in a lot of processed foods. So like wheat is included in a lot of different processed foods because it's relatively cheap to produce and it's used, in many different foods. And also we think that the gluten intolerance may be associated, and this is more controversial. We don't have enough data yet, but it may be associated with GMO products and the use of pesticides. We hope that more studies will come when it comes to that. When it comes to GMO and pesticides, we just don't have enough to say at this time. So, I get that question asked all the time. Should I, only buy organic? The most important thing is that you're eating healthier, right? More whole foods, more plant-based. So that's the most important thing. If you can afford organic, and it's not gonna, make a huge issue and break the bank, then do it, okay? But if you can't afford organic, don't even think about it. That's just something that you're already eating so much better by eating a whole food plant-based diet. We always tell people, and Natalie can, chime in here, that avoid food, like the foods that have a hard cover, like bananas or avocados. You can eat those and not have them be organic, because we think that extra protected layer on the outside does protect the pesticides from coming in. But in general, just washing your produce really well. And I'm sure Natalie has other tips when it comes to that.
Yes, I just wanted to. We have a question.
Who wants to tackle this one?
So melanosis is a term for a lot of different conditions. So one, I would have to know which one she's actually talking about. There's melanosis in the digestive system. There's melanosis outside the digestive system. But also, I don't know what the question is. So Natalie, if you want to chime in, and maybe the person can clarify.
Right. Yeah, I actually don't understand the question either. How does this affect the gut? So we need clarification on the melanosis.
Okay, so rephrase the question and we'll try to tackle it again. I have another question. This is from Dr. Sarisha Patluri. This would also be helpful.
You want to get that one, Natalie?
Yeah. So the prebiotics are going to be the carbohydrates that we're introducing into the system, right? So the body's going to start to break that down. So there is this whole, first of all, going back to the whole grains. So grains, people tend to think, oh, I can't have any grains, or they classify carbs, that we have these low carb diets. So like we mentioned, the prebiotic foods are going to be what feeds this bacteria. We want good options to be able to feed the healthy bacteria so it can continue to grow and flourish. So things that will feed it bad foods, right, or create the bad bacteria are going to be things that are highly processed, high in sugar. So we want to avoid the foods that are what we consider processed foods that are high in sugar. So when we're talking about carbohydrates, like our fruits, our vegetables, and our whole grains, those are going to be things that are going to be nutritious carbohydrates. So higher complex carbohydrates that don't provide as much sugar. So the fiber in there is what's going to really be, the polysaccharides that are going to help break down the bacteria, or feed the bacteria, the good stuff. So then when we get into cooked and uncooked foods, there's that whole, should I follow a raw diet, or should I, have food? So there's nothing wrong with having foods that are cooked, just not overcooked. There are ways to lose some nutrients in foods, but what we want to make sure that we're doing is getting a variety of different whole grains and whole plant-based foods, so that we are getting the most nutrients and getting that variety in our diet. So there's a little bit of everything that we just talked about, but I hope that answers that question. So as long as you're not overcooking the food, so having a variety, you have your raw salads, your raw greens, and then having some steamed vegetables or sauteed veggies is all part of a healthy diet. We know that there's some foods like tomatoes, for example, the nutrients actually come out more when they're cooked versus raw.
Yeah.
So there are things that do have benefit in actually cooking versus eating raw. And the same thing with beans. We don't eat beans raw because we actually can't digest them raw. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that they are cooked at the appropriate temperatures.
Okay, good. All right.
I love those points, Natalie, and I just want to reemphasize, as a gastroenterologist, when a person comes to me in a raw food diet, it's highly concerning for me because they are not getting that well-rounded whole food plant-based nutrition, right? They're missing whole food groups like legumes, right? They're missing whole food groups like grains in many instances that need to be cooked, for example, with legumes. And it's just, I think that from a microbiome standpoint, when you're not feeding the subset of bacteria that feed on the grains or that feed on the legumes, then you're starving them. And that is creating an imbalance, because what we want is diversity of plants. We don't want to eliminate foods, part of that whole food plant-based diet, because when we do so, we are really starving whole populations of the microbes, and you're predisposing yourself to that dysbiosis, because if you have less populations of the microbes, the good ones, the bad ones will take over and will cause disease down the line. So any form of, for example, and it goes the same like when we do a processed vegan diet, right? Like when we say an unhealthy vegan diet, because we know vegan diets can mean many things. When we do a more processed vegan diet, we're actually not getting those whole foods either, and you are further feeding the bad microbes and empowering them to take over and cause disease in your body. So
well said. Well said. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting study going back to that whole gluten controversy, where we think, gluten is the cause of many GI symptoms, and many patients think that they are intolerant to gluten. So this was a study that was blinded, meaning people didn't know what they were eating, and they gave them three different groups, different bars. So one group got the fructan bar, one group got the gluten bar, and one group got the placebo bar. And then they asked them, how do you feel? And surprisingly, if you see it on the right side of this diagram, it was the fructans that were causing most of the GI symptoms. And actually, the gluten bar wasn't associated with GI symptoms. It was actually associated with, negative GI symptoms, right? So again, this is one study, and it was a small study. So, we can't put all our eggs on this study, but this is really interesting what we're seeing with the whole gluten intolerance. It may be other things that are actually contributing to the issue with gluten, and it's not actually the gluten itself. It could be fructans, which are often included in gluten containing foods, and or it could be that these foods that you're consuming that have gluten are overly processed. If you go on to the next slide. We talk about some of the foods that contain gluten, and Natalie can chime in here and tell us because she is an expert in this area.
Yeah, so what happens here, so gluten, again, is another one of those controversial topics that, should I eat it? Should I avoid it? What's the deal? And just like Dr. Mendez mentioned, what we're trying to do here really is getting rid of the processed products that we're introducing, because there's just so much processed gluten out there. It's in everything. Those that have celiac disease that have to remove gluten from their diet, when they hear this for the first time, it's like, how am I going to do that? It's in everything. So the fact that we're so exposed to so much processed food is very scary. So just how it says on the slide where you have, so what is gluten? If we were to define it, it's going to be anything that is made out of wheat, rye, barley, and oats. So oats are naturally gluten-free. However, when we harvest oats, we harvest them along with the wheat. So they do contain wheat. Regular oats, when we harvest them, they do have wheat in them in the processing of harvesting the product. So unless you're getting certified gluten-free oats, then that would be a wheat-free or gluten-free option for the oats itself. So, wheat, rye, barley, and oats by themselves in their natural whole food form are a very nutritious option, right? So they have all of their B vitamins, very high in fiber, and just excellent with providing the body with some good nutrition. However, when we take the wheat and we break it down and we refine it and we make it into the white flour that people know to bake with, then that is where we have taken that whole grain and just really processed it down to be a refined flour. And that's where we get into issues. So then we take the starch, we get rid of all of the nutrients, we strip it of all of its fiber and just use the starch itself to then put it into food products. So then these are going to be things like our crackers and breads and pastas. So we no longer have the whole grain in its whole form. Now we just have the flour, and we know that over studies, it's causing the glycemic index to go up. It's causing this imbalance in the gut as well when you're adding sugar and fats into this floury mix. So that's where the confusion can occur. There is, again, these whole grains that can be very nutritious, but the way we end up processing them is what turns them not so great for us.
Okay. I love that. And Natalie, can you offer some advice as to grains that we know, all whole grains are incredibly healthy, except, if you have celiac disease or if you have a specific gluten intolerance, what other grains can people consume that don't include gluten or cross-contamination in the,
Right. So excellent question. Should have brought that up. So grains that are naturally gluten-free are going to be like our rice. So then looking for things like whole grain, wild rice or black rice or red rice. These are going to be things that, we don't think about. So white rice, what happens is it has its little cover and we take it off and throw away all of the nutrients there as well. So again, white rice is a more processed rice. But when we're looking at a whole a wild rice or a black rice, it still has the cover on it. So again, that's where our fiber, our B vitamins are. So we want to look for those options to be as a whole grain. Then we have things like quinoa is also considered a whole grain. And then the oats, as long as they're gluten free. We also have things like sorghum and aramarth. So a different millet would be another one. Things that are kind of not so mainstream that we might not be as familiar with, but also great options to include as far as a gluten-free whole grain diet.
Okay. All right, so we'll go on to the next slide.
Yeah, so, this is a very controversial topic when it comes to inflammatory bowel disease. Some preliminary studies in animal models do show that gluten may be causing some inflammation in the small intestine, and that's called ileitis in the last part of the small intestine. And In general, our recommendation is to focus on removing those processed foods from your diet. If you are in a flare, consider going gluten-free. If you're in a flare of your inflammatory bowel disease, consider going gluten-free. And as Natalie mentioned, other whole grains like farro and all types of wild rice, brown rice, black rice are incredibly healthy options that they can that they can consume and not be consuming gluten while they're in a flare.
Okay.
So and another part with the grains, I think also that comes into kind of the controversy is the amount. So while we're saying that they're good for us, we also want to watch the portion. I know down here in South Florida, we're a very Hispanic population and rice is a staple. But having, you'll go to a restaurant and they're serving you 2 cups of cooked rice on your plate. That's a ridiculous amount of rice. So the serving would be half a cup to a cup of cooked rice. Half a cup would be more for, a 1,400 calorie diet. But you have a little bit on your plate versus having a mountain on there. So that's really where the balance comes in. You want to have a little bit to add that diversity for the whole grains, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be the main thing on your plate all the time. So just watching the portions of it, so you can have a balance of like a healthy meal could be some black rice, a cup of vegetables, and a cup of legumes would be a really balanced plate. Versus having, the opposite, where you're just having a sprinkle or garnish of vegetables and just 1 or 2 little beans on your plate to decorate. So we just want to kind of keep that in mind, and then what you're snacking on, right? So if you're just having crackers and bread throughout the day, then that's a problem as well.
Okay.
Or it could create a problem.
All right. Excellent. All right. Now, I know these are often hidden in foods, and they're very problematic. I happen to have a little cousin who has Crohn's disease, and I've now learned from studying Crohn's that these things are very problematic. Who wants to address this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start and then Natalie can chime in too. So, some studies show that emulsifiers, and we'll clarify what those are, could be one of the things triggering inflammatory bowel disease, such as Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Unfortunately, emulsifiers and these sweeteners are found in almost every processed food. So if you are consuming a packaged food, just assume that they have it, unless you look at the ingredient list and you see that they don't have it. It's a very, very long list of the last time I counted, it was 30 to 40 different emulsifiers, and unfortunately, it's in everything. This is another issue with the food industry. This area is not regulated. These things are allowed into our diet, and nobody's putting a stop to them. And they're basically fillers to make things more fluffy, to increase the shelf life, to increase the creaminess of these products. So they're on everything, and that's why the studies for inflammatory bowel disease are alarming, because we're seeing that this may be one of the issues associated with this imbalance in our gut microbiome, in causing dysbiosis and possibly inflammation throughout our body, digestive disorders and other disorders. So that's why our emphasis on whole foods, it needs to be at the forefront of our health, because of this is one of the components that we know is causing inflammation in our gut specifically.
Yeah, when I work with clients, and as I'm an instructor with Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, I often tell people, they'll say the food is really expensive, and I'll say, well, when you actually are eating whole food plant-based, it's actually not that expensive, because you're not paying for the packaging and all of the other emulsifiers and extra components that really normal people would not identify as food. So it's actually less expensive to eat like this. And when you stay away from the processed food, you actually are by default not consuming those extra non-food processed items.
Right. Yeah, and what's scary about all this is that they are considered under the GRAS, genetic or generally safe to eat foods by the USDA. But when you look at that list, like who's really regulating that list? How can we stay on top of it? And where's the research to say, that research that we really need to show that this connection is happening. So we do see that there is this imbalance. So we're finding that, but then it just takes so long to get off of the shelves. And there's other countries that don't allow some of these ingredients to be on products and labels. So it makes it really unfortunate. So being a lookout for these lists of items, carrageenan is another one that I didn't see on, I think we missed that one on the list, but just to be careful because there are a lot of connections with being affected by them. And you will, when you turn over these processed foods or packages, I see a lot of them in things like plant-based yogurts and plant-based milks. So what happens is they put in these emulsifiers because they don't want it, when you put it to sit, it separates. So for it to be something that looks better on the shelves and for people to purchase, they put these emulsifiers in so that it stays bound together. But if we're showing it to link back to bad health, then it's not something that you want connected to. And a lot of patients will find that this causes a lot of gas and bloating. Some even have a laxative effect. So not good things to have. And then you're not really sure why you're getting these reactions. And it could be some of these emulsifiers.
So one of the things that I'll tell people to do is to make your own plant-based milk. And even though these machines are a little bit pricey, if you actually cost out what you're paying, but we're paying for these shelf-stable packages, they're expensive, they're bad for the environment. And if you actually invest in one of the plant-based milk makers, the one I have is the Almond Cow, and then I just did Chef AJ's show, and she had a new device called Nutramilk. Nutramilk, and it actually consumes the nut meat. So it comes into it really highly processes. You really don't throw out the fiber.
Wow, so, I love that one.
And that would be, I'll put that link up because I think it's a great tool. Yeah, and I'll put a link into the Facebook page. But that way you avoid all of those things. Because what do you think is the most appropriate beverage that we should be consuming every day?
Yeah.
Water, exactly. Yeah. Everybody seems to want to have some other drink. And unless you're just drinking, herbal tea, water is what we should be consuming. And then by default, you're not consuming any of these toxic substances.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. You nailed it on the head, Lisa. If you're making your own items, and that's the part that we run into issues, even in big organizations, it's that time that we need to make things ourselves. But that's really where you have the full control over what goes into your body and what ends up affecting your gut microbiome. Because we have all of these chemicals and stuff. And again, it's put in the food system to help things get better. But in reality, it's only making things worse. So if we can make our own milk or plant-based milks, those are going to be the east. That's the best approach, right? Because you're not needing to go to these options.
Yeah. Right. And another thing along milk that, there's a lot of misconception, and we didn't include this in our presentation, but is juicing, right? So I get this question very often, and we know a lot of people who juice. And I tell them, look, the microbiome doesn't do well with juicing. Why? Because you're completely stripping out the fiber. So you're actually not feeding the gut microbiome. When you actually strip out the fiber, meaning a juice, yes, you're getting antioxidants and you're getting a lot of nutritious products in there from the fruits and the vegetables that you're juicing. However, when you strip away the fiber, you're not only not feeding the microbiome, but you're also consuming a higher glycemic food, right? So I often don't even like to talk about glycemic foods because when we're consuming whole foods, that doesn't really matter. But the fiber really helps to slow down the digestion of those sugars. So when you do juicing, it's the pure sugar molecule along with antioxidants and other healthy chemicals. But by stripping away the fiber, you're creating a dysregulation of that glucose insulin system, and your glucose is likely to increase way faster. And I personally don't recommend juicing as a water replacement. If people tell me, are you team juicing or team smoothie? Team smoothie all the way, right? Because when you do a smoothie, you're maintaining all the fiber and the food. You're really eating the whole food. So this is another common myth that we encounter in the plant-based world, outside the plant-based world. And I just want to emphasize that. And I'm sure, from a dietetic standpoint, Natalie has stuff to say about juices.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, there's kind of that balance, right? So somebody might say, oh, but I have, a ginger shot, here. So there are ways to kind of incorporate, but not something that you feel that you have to have every single day, or that it's going to be beneficial. So, what you want to do is really eat it in its whole form, right? So if we can get that, so then obviously, you might think, well, I just wasted, or I juiced 6 carrots. You could have made like a huge feast with 6 carrots, things like that, where you're getting all of that fiber and benefit from. But then again, if you're just having a small concentrated amount, but some of these places that you go to and you get juice or fresh juice, it's a huge cup. So those things will make your blood sugar shoot up. So it has to be a balance. So when you smoothie, that was what I was going to say. When you make a smoothie, you can take all of the veggies in its whole form again, the fruits, and you're blending them. One of the things that I do run into with some clients that do smoothies often is that they add too much fruit versus the balance of vegetables. So you want to have a good balance between the veggies or the higher fiber and the fruit. So the fruit, you want to use it in replacement of like a sweetener. So 1 to 2 fruit, but limiting it to 1 cup of fruit in your smoothie, so that it's that sweetness that you're getting from the fruit, but not necessarily 10 different fruits and then you have this huge juice, just because again you're kind of taking a look at all of that in there. So if you can add some of that, the veggies in there, you can add some of the whole grains, maybe some of the oats would be a great option to include, just to balance out again the nutrients that you're drinking.
That's good. So you're saying about a cup of fruit. So a cup of blueberries or mixed berries would be an excellent addition.
Right. Or if you wanted to change it up, maybe it's like a small piece of banana, like a ripe banana, and then half a cup of the blueberries. That way you get like a variety. But the idea is that whatever you add in would limit to 1 cup. So you can, bring down the sugar content, even though it's natural sugar, but then you're getting some more of the nutrients by making sure you add some veggies in there as well. Like some spinach would be great, some kale.
Okay, so let's go through the slides. We've got a bunch of questions, so I want to leave some room at the end. I don't want to take us off track by answering questions that are about gut digestion, but they aren't necessarily what you're talking about now. So for all the people that have questions, we're going to get to your questions. We'll leave some time at the end so we can do that. So stay with us, and let's get to the next slide.
All right, so another hot topic are nightshades and lectins. So, nightshades are found in vegetables and fruits, things like eggplant, peppers, and paprika, potatoes, tomatillos, several different fruits. And we know that these foods are really healthy. They're rich in antioxidants, phytochemicals, and fiber. And if you go on to the next slide, we go a little bit in depth to lectins specifically. So lectins are found in like, for example, uncooked legumes, and then in the cooking process you break down that. So nobody should be eating like raw black beans, for example, or raw lentils. So we usually are in the habit of cooking most of our legumes. And they've received a really bad reputation due to a very popular book and fad diet that has fueled a profitable anti-lectin movement, and all in the hopes of selling supplements that you actually don't need. So lectins, like we said, are found in raw legumes and a lot of different other foods. The research on lectins does not support the myth at all. The evidence we do have when it comes to lectins, if you go back to the slide, Yeah, so when it comes to cooked legumes, it shows that they're incredibly nutrient dense, they're complex carbohydrates, they're high protein foods within the whole food plant-based world, and they have many health associations, including maintenance of a healthy weight, glucose maintenance, cholesterol, hypertension control, and they actually found to lower rates of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Legumes are regularly consumed within all the regions of the blue zone. So like in Japan, they eat a lot of edamame, for example, and soy-based products. In Costa Rica and the Nicoya region, they eat a lot of black beans. And just like, for example, a Mediterranean diet is naturally very high in legumes. So we know that the data doesn't support this whole lectin myth. Now, when it comes, so we know that the data supports that they're incredibly healthy foods. Now, the whole lectin discussion is a lengthy one. First of all, and Natalie and I were talking about this yesterday in preparation for this presentation, is that there's whole populations. So we said the populations that regularly consume legumes are incredibly healthy, right? But there's whole populations that ethnically don't consume legumes. So for example, we know that legumes are regularly consumed amongst Asian populations and Latino populations, right? Natalie and I grew up eating beans because, you know, we are Latina women. But for example, a lot of white American populations or European populations don't actually consume a lot of legumes. Subsets of the African American population don't consume legumes. Some do, some don't. So, you know, when somebody comes to me and, you know, as a clinician tells me I cannot at all tolerate legumes, and we know legumes are so healthy and we want to incorporate them in the diet, that you really have to take into account not only cultural and ethnic differences, whether their body, if you've never eaten beans in your life, I'm not going to all of a sudden tell you, okay, go on a whole food plant-based diet and then you're going to be eating legumes every single day. No, that doesn't work like that, because we know then people are going to have a lot of issues. So we recommend, you know, and Natalie and I work with patients all the time, one-on-one, where we introduce the ones that are most easily digested. And Natalie can talk about the digestibility of legumes, but basically you want to meet people where they're at. And if they are not regularly consuming a food, then we really have to be very intentional and mindful when we introduce these foods into their diet. If your microbiome if you're not feeding the microbiome legumes, don't expect the microbiome that digests legumes to be there and be working for you. So that's where a lot of the myth with legumes comes in. And this person that is this created this anti-lectin movement has really capitalized on people's microbial weaknesses. So he's capitalizing on that. He's making tons of money off of that. And it's based on their weaknesses. We're not getting to the root cause of the issue. We're not solving the underlying issue, which is our microbiome has a weakness in these specific foods. It could be lectins, it could be wheat, it could be soy, it could be really any plant-based food. So when we talk about food intolerances, this is really what we're talking about. Our bodies naturally, we secrete enzymes that are able to digest animal protein and fats, both plant-based and animal fats, because genetically we needed it to survive, right? And then what happened is that the microbiome, because the microbiome replicates every 20 to 30 minutes, and in 24 hours we get 50 new generations of microbes. They're the ones in charge of digesting most of our carbohydrates. This is a fascinating topic, and there's not really that much data on it. So as humans, our bodies secrete enzymes that can digest maybe 20, maybe 30% of carbohydrates, but we rely on the microbiota to digest the rest. And that was energy efficient. So biologically and through evolution, that makes sense, because the microbiota, it would be inefficient for our bodies to actually create all the enzymes to digest all the different carbohydrates, because there's so many. And it really depended on the region of the world we were at, depended on the season and what that harvest was for that season. Because the microbiota can adapt so quickly, evolutionarily, it relied heavier on the microbiota to digest most of the carbohydrates. So again, the microbiota digests most of the carbohydrates. So if we have a weakness in our microbiome, we see it with the reflection of a food intolerance, meaning, bloating, gassiness, maybe some diarrhea, maybe some constipation. But it really just reflects a microbial imbalance that we have to address. And we can fix that. Like, we can work with you to actually get you to the point that maybe if you have never eaten legumes, you're not going to be eating a pot of legumes, but maybe we'll get you eating lentils, and you'll be able to tolerate that and thrive and feed the microbes that feed on the legumes, and be able to provide that complete food to your body. So I don't know if that makes sense, Lisa, but this is like such a fascinating topic to us, because
I love this topic, and I think what the important point that I like everybody to know is that your microbiome is not stagnant. It's not constant. It's not, I didn't grow up eating beans because my mother had ulcerative colitis. So I had to learn to eat beans as an adult. But you can change your microbiome. In fact, when you take antibiotics, you change your microbiome. So do you wipe them out and they never come back? No, you eat the prebiotic foods that feed your microbiome so you can actually find a healthy level. So when you work with a registered dietitian and a board certified gastroenterologist who actually understands the gut microbiome, these individuals like Vanessa and like Natalie can help guide patients through that very that process, which may go differently for different people. Some people may transition quickly. Some people may take, I can have 3 beans. I can't have any more than 3 beans. And then they build from there.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Dr. Mendez and I do together. We've worked with so many patients that, it's starting them off where they're at, starting at a baseline, and then starting to introduce food, but slowly. So it doesn't mean that you're going to jump off the cliff and start eating this and start tolerating it well, but you do have to start to introduce it. So maybe 1 tablespoon at a time of just having it within meals and foods that you can tolerate, but that you're slowly introducing it, and obviously in a clean form. Because I think of beans, and I think of like baked beans that are full of sugar and processed. So there's a difference, right? There's ways that you cook the beans and you prepare them. You can soak them. We know that soaking more than 24 hours also releases a lot of that and helps break down the cells so that you can digest it. But that's one of the things about beans that a lot of people shy away, and some vegetables, because they feel, oh no, if I eat anything green or if I have any vegetable, I'm going to be running to the bathroom. And again, with that change in the microbiome, that's how that you start to tolerate things, so that you get rid of you develop the enzymes that you need to break these foods down.
Can you talk a little bit about legumes being the universal food of longevity?
Yeah.
So absolutely. So, as we mentioned, beans are consumed in every of the 6 regions considered the blue zone regions, like the Nicoya region in Costa Rica. They're Latins, and they regularly consume black beans. That Japanese consume soybeans and tofu in many forms. And the Mediterranean diet, we know, is very heavily influenced by different legumes. So every region of the world consumes legumes, and legumes have been associated with an increased in longevity, decrease in things like diabetes, obesity, and and control of weight. It's there, and cardiovascular disease too. They're incredibly healthy, and really the goal is to get you consuming at least 1 serving of beans per day. But like Natalie said, that has to be done. If you have issues digesting legumes, it has to be done very mindfully, very intentionally, and if it gives you a lot of digestive symptoms, with the guidance of somebody like us, that really does know what we're working with. Because many regular dietitians or many regular gastroenterologists will just allow you to avoid the food. And how is that getting to solve the root cause of the issue? Food avoidance is a huge issue, and it stems from food intolerances. So addressing this issue, why I love to explain why is this happening? Why is this happening to you? Is it culturally, ethnically, these foods were not consumed? Is it because you took antibiotics or went through a very traumatic experience where it caused that imbalance in your gut microbiome? We know everything influences our gut microbiome for the good and the bad, but like Lisa said, the microbiome is very resilient. Just because we took 3 rounds of antibiotics, it doesn't mean we wiped out your microbiome completely. There's a thing called the resistome. This is the genetic material of in the microbes that allows it to resist being wiped out. It allows it to come back. So discovery of that was really exciting because it's there. It just needs to be stimulated, right? And with very intentional working a little bit of these foods into your diet with the guidance of somebody that knows what they're doing is the way to recover that microbiome for lasting health and longevity.
And do people need to live in South Florida to see you?
No, so we're virtual. So we see patients in many, many states in the United States. So if you have a question, just definitely let us know. And I see patients internationally, and I believe Natalie does too. So yeah. And
you speak Spanish.
Yes, we're bilingual.
Which is very helpful because I think the Latinx community needs to, this is information that would benefit that population, because it's a population that is disproportionately challenged with obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. So
absolutely, our community.
It's not your genetics, as Eric Adams says. It was not my genetics. He says it was his dinner.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that genetics, it's only one small component, but genetics, our genes are stimulated by our environment. That means everything that surrounds us and everything that we put in our body. So, that two-hit hypothesis in medicine is very well known. Yeah, we may have the genes to develop cardiovascular disease, but if you never stimulate that gene, if you don't turn it on with a poor diet and lifestyle, it will never manifest.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to FODMAPs.
Ooh, all right, Natalie.
All right. So let's it's a little bit brief so we can have time for questions at the end. But who wants to tackle this one?
Yeah. So this is a big topic, but I'm just going to brush it over the top just because I wanted to introduce it. There are a lot of people suffering from IBS. So this gas and bloating that we've been talking about, and I get patients all the time that are completely frustrated with their physicians because they'll go to their physician and say, they're in severe pain, they're very uncomfortable every time they eat, and it doesn't go away. Once you have a flare-up, it lasts for a long time because you haven't found the root cause of what's triggering your system. And then when they go to the physician, there's no treatment, right? So the treatments are all over the place because we ourselves as a medical group, don't have the right treatment for this to give to a patient that will make them feel better. So I myself have had a physician tell me, oh, well, IBS is like throwing a dart at the wall. We just see what sticks. I was like, what? How do you tell a patient this? But what ends up happening is that there is a diet out there called the FODMAPs. And we're finding that there are certain foods that we can classify that actually can cause more of this gas and bloating. So when we classify these foods, they're going to be fermentable foods, the fructans and the lactose and the monosaccharides and the polyols. So you can go to the next slide. And these are some foods that, where did it go? There's one with a chart that tells you the different foods in there. So then that
there we go. There we go.
So here you'll see that these are very common in our diet. So one of the things that across the board, something like I had agave on here that people, that's something new. It's a trend that suddenly happened that people started just putting it on everything. So this is very high in fructose. And so people started having a lot of symptoms when they started introducing agave. But then they're told, oh, agave is a better choice. So they thought, right? And then, so adding these foods in, another one is lactose, milk, cheese. It's very common in diets and people have the hardest time getting rid of cheese. There's some studies that are showing that it stimulates the brain in a way that really gets those cravings to come out. So people have a hard time separating from cheese and yogurt. So very common in diets. The same thing with onions and fructans. So these are things that, you're cooking with onions. It's just something that we always do to increase the aroma of the food and give food more flavor. But then these could be foods that are triggers as well in some people. We talked about the legumes, but we already mentioned on how there's ways to cook them and prepare them and slowly introduce so that the body can break them down. And then the other one are going to be things like sugar alcohols. So there's things like chewing gum. People spend the whole day chewing on gum that is full of these sugar alcohols. So these are like my top ones that I always review with anybody who's experiencing gum bloating and gas, because it's that trapped gas that they can't get rid of, because these are foods that are constant in their diet every single day throughout the day. So until they remove some of this, and that's kind of the concept behind the FODMAPs, is that you identify some of these trigger foods, you remove them for about 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the level, so that you can identify where you're at and what foods are your triggers. So a lot of people can relate with this and find it. So again, we work closely together to try to identify, especially these main ones that I just reviewed, because those are the main like trigger ones that can happen with a lot of people.
Yeah,
okay,
and I just quickly have 2 points about that.
Sure.
In terms of a plant-based, lifestyle, we know that, for example, things like dairy, whole food plant-based lifestyle, we know that things like dairy and sugar alcohols, that those are things that are just not healthy, right? So we shouldn't be, at least not in the United States, we shouldn't be regularly consuming them. We talked about the other ones and why people may have intolerances or sensitivities to digesting them. So that's my take on that. Some of those on that list are healthy, like the legumes and all the other fruits and vegetables, and some of them we know are not healthy, like the simple sugars, sugar alcohols, and dairy products. So it's really important, because that's very confusing to people, which ones to reintroduce. And then the other point is, like Natalie said, is people are on a low FODMAP diets for the rest of their lives. That doesn't make any sense, because again, then you're avoiding this very limited nutrition that you're following, right? You're avoiding so many vegetables and so many fruits and legumes, which we know are associated with health and longevity.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's great. Let's go back here. All right. Let's quickly talk about soy, and then I want to get to the questions. But maybe we'll pull up one question first.
Yeah. We can leave the soy out if we don't have
to.
All right. Well, then let's go to some of the questions. So Simone Reyes says this, can you see these? And then I'll take it off, because right now Vanessa is not on the screen. So I'll leave it up until you can read it, and then I'll take it off.
The anti-inflammatory popular smoothies have 2 bananas and 1 cup of fruit is too much, according to what you just said. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of sugar.
Right, yeah. So I would limit that to half a banana or a banana, just depending on what else goes in there. So 1 full banana is a serving and perfectly healthy to have. But having 2 bananas and then doing other fruit throughout the day, that's where we start to add up too much.
Yeah,
if you're making for more than 1 person, then you can start to have more. But you're saying the net effect for a serving or a 16-ounce glass.
Correct, right. So everything that we mentioned is for 1 person to drink. So if you're making a bigger batch, then definitely. If you're going to be spacing this out, then that changes the equation. But the idea here is that you're having 1 serving of whatever you're putting in.
I love this question, Simone, because I love to hear what people's go-to smoothies are. And I have my go-to smoothie. So my anti-inflammatory smoothie always includes, like a natural sweetener, like Natalie said. So I'll put like half a banana. I love to include wild berries, which are incredibly anti-inflammatory. I include fresh ginger and fresh turmeric in there. Obviously, peeled. I love to include matcha but it has to be a really good brand that tests for heavy metals. So, I have like 2 brands that I regularly use. What else do I put? And then just to add some grains to that, because I don't have an issue with oats, and, I don't have a gluten, I don't have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. I do put some kind of grains in there. So I'll put oats, a little bit of oats, but that one is not for everybody. And I will include seeds. So I'll put like hemp or ground flaxseed in there. So my go-to smoothie has half a banana, the wild blueberries. I have spinach or kale. I have 1 or 2 seeds, and I have the ginger and the turmeric, and possibly like a tablespoon of oats. What's yours, Natalie?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty much the same thing. So again, I try to change it up but I have my little buckets. So some kind of whole grain. I really like the oats as well. So again, just depending on the tolerance, so it could be the oat flour, it could be the whole, oats, or it could even be like things like quinoa, or just adding like nuts itself and then grinding it up and getting a flour from that. Then having some kind of greens, so the spinach or the kale options or any other greens. And then having some of the veggies in there, but then always adding that turmeric and the ginger. So exactly what you said.
I love it. I didn't know that.
Now, I have a question. What about patients that have very bad GERD and are told not to consume caffeine? Should they not consume matcha because of the caffeine in the green tea?
That's a great question, Lisa. So we know that ground up green tea leaves, which is what matcha is very different from a nutritional standpoint. Like, it's way higher in antioxidants, even just with like a 1/4 teaspoon. I am not a fan of removing caffeine just blindly. I think we're all very different in the way that our food sensitivities are. So when it comes to these specific foods that people may react to, Natalie and I regularly ask our patients to keep a food diary, and that is the best way to really see if caffeine is an issue for you. We know that the data on coffee, if you don't have cardiovascular disease, black coffee is really healthy for you. And it may be one of the protective factors in Latino communities, along with legumes. So, I don't like to blindly just remove caffeine. I really like to actually see if they have an issue with it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And Betty Ann Cornwell wants to know about monk fruit as a sweetener.
Yes, my take on sweeteners. So everyone's always looking for another sweetener. What's the right sweetener? The same thing they do that with oils as well. So my take on sweeteners is trying to go with a natural approach coming from fruit. That's nature's natural sweetener. Then we have the more processed. So then we'll have things like honey and cane sugar. But you're looking for like a raw form. And then things like monk fruit or like stevia. The thing with monk fruit and stevia is I find that they have aftertaste. And then when you're taking the leaf and you're breaking it down into this powdered form, it's still a processed food. So again, that's where you kind of have your tiers, and the whole concept is needing less. So the idea is that you're training your taste buds not to need so much sweetness. So if something is naturally sweet, you're going to have, again, from your fruit choices and using that as your sweetener versus having to add something to it to sweeten it.
Okay, one more question. Oh, let's see. Okay.
There was one before that. There was one
before that. Here, I was going to do. This one is the one I was trying to get.
So my take on that is that I don't know if you're buying it. If you're buying it, it may be an emulsifier issue, but also remember that nut milks are higher in fat. So the fat content may be actually what's driving some of this bloating. I recommend trying, like, for example, oat milk or, like another type of the almond milk and see if you have the same reaction. So I wouldn't just say, oh, it's that almond milk. Try another almond milk, see if it gives you the same reaction. Look at the ingredient list, look to see if it has emulsifiers. If it ends up being that it is this store-bought almond milk, you can always try to make it yourself, or switch to another one. I don't regularly recommend using nut milks on a daily basis. Like, for example, in your smoothies, the fat content is a lot higher. And remember, it is a processed food at the end of the day. So I'd rather you eat the cashews whole rather than get this fatty food as a drink.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you're using it as a beverage as opposed to maybe putting some in your coffee. So would you feel differently about putting something in your coffee as opposed to a whole beverage?
Yeah, so I mean, cashews are healthy. We know that the fat content is high. As a creamer, it may be healthier, but it is a lot less, right? So I would allow it. But again, remember, if it has the emulsifiers, it's not going to be as good for you. I get that question with coconut milk a lot. Coconut milk has a high saturated fat content. So I try to, I tell people to limit it as much as possible. So I don't recommend you drink coconut milk. If you're going to use it in cooking, I recommend using a small amount and then the rest of it using another plant milk, just because it's so high saturated fat content. It's one of the only plant-based foods that has such a high saturated saturated fat content.
Yeah.
Okay. And then this is actually a good question because it has to do with medication. How do you know what's really affecting you if you're on medication? So maybe you can address this one and then we'll do our sign off.
How can we know what works? Doesn't work if the patient is on prescribed medication. You're right. So that's why, oftentimes lifestyle is our go-to. We really like identifying which foods you're intolerant to and working with you to actually get you tolerating them. So lifestyle is my go-to for heartburn. And most of the time, 90% of my patients respond to lifestyle modifications through diet and weight loss, for example. The toughest situations I come across are those patients that they're on a clean diet. We know that they're not overweight. So then what do we do? And then it goes back to what else is happening in your life? What other lifestyle factors are affecting this? How about chronic stress? How are your stress levels? We know chronic stress is one of the contributing factors in heartburn and digestive symptoms. So, we like to take the whole person and we don't just focus on, I don't just focus on nutrition because there's so much more in your lifestyle that is affecting your microbiome and contributing to digestive symptoms. So I would have to look at the whole person to see what could be contributing to that. But yeah, and then if somebody has intractable heartburn, that, everything else, we're modifying it, or maybe they can't modify it, right? Maybe it's taking them a long time to lose that weight and they're still having intractable heartburn, meaning it doesn't go away with Tums or some of the lesser medications. Then we do have to use stronger medications to get the patient to the point where everything else, we're alleviating from a lifestyle standpoint, and then we take them off the medication. So that would be the way to approach it.
I just wanted to add too that I think a lot of times, so medication has a role in especially in chronic disease management, but we always have to focus on lifestyle. So even though the symptoms might improve, there's still so much benefit to still adding that lifestyle, because not only can we possibly decrease and come off of medication, but we're also introducing all of this greatness that we just reviewed. So it's a balance. But definitely we've had patients who might be on medications that can tolerate more when they're on medications versus without. But if the food isn't being introduced at the right level, then that's where that imbalance happens. So we have to. It's kind of it's a two-way street. We have to work at it together.
Okay. All right. I'd like everybody to know how to reach Dr. Mendez and Natalie Castro. So I've had their social media and their websites running as a ticker tape. So if you didn't miss it, you can go back and watch it and just freeze Facebook so you have a chance to copy it down. And so they are available. They're both fairly active on social media. And I will just show you one quick. So here's an example. This is Dr. Mendez's slide. She does these wonderful graphics that are so informative. And I think she has a great Instagram. And Natalie has a beautiful Instagram. It has a lot of food on it. And I would suggest that you go there as well. So let me go back here and say thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We didn't get a chance to get to all the questions, but I will ask if Natalie and Vanessa would graciously respond to some of the comments. And you both don't have to respond to the same comment, but if you could just sort of divide them up over the next few days. People are really interested, so if you could just give short answers, that would be wonderful. And I want to say Happy Hanukkah to everybody. It's the last night of Hanukkah. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate Christmas. And we will be back. Not next week, maybe on New Year's Day. We will be back. And I'm so excited to have you guys here today. Maybe we'll just do half Q&A next time. We'll talk for a period of time, and then we'll just do Q&A because everybody's got so many questions. And I think that will be wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Thank you, guys.
Happy New Year. Stay home, wear your mask, be smart. That's my advice to everybody. And we will get through this. Thank you very much. I'm Lisa Karlan, your host for Hey Doc, What's New in Plant-Based Medicine. Please share this video. Please write your comments. And we can hopefully have a much healthier, much happier 2021. Bye, everybody.